Hi, this is Marian Waldman with Teach My Kid to Read, and I am so excited to introduce Faith Borkowsky, teacher, literacy specialist, author, our board member, and somebody who could teach anybody to read. And we are kicking off this month with Faith's presentation because we believe that before anybody starts working with different programs or different resources, there is just basic information that everybody needs to know for pre-literacy and early literacy skills. And Faith is going to, she's going to simplify it tonight. And I am so excited to introduce her, my friend, Faith Borkowsky.
Thank you, Marian. I'm so happy to be here. So, hi everyone. As you know, it's a full moon tonight. And of course, we had some technical difficulties, but we're ready to roll. So what everyone should know about literacy. Let's begin. Okay, sorry about that. So skilled reading encompasses two domains: language comprehension and word recognition. We're going to start talking about language comprehension first, because that's something that most of us are familiar with. When we read to our children, they are learning new words, they're learning sentence structure. So we're going to start there, but the bulk of the presentation is going to be about word recognition, what it is, how to get there, and how the two come together to be skilled readers. Here we go. So first, language and reading. When children are born, right away, there is conversation with the baby. Even though the baby's not talking, the baby is picking up on everything you're saying. And this should be taken right up from birth, where we're talking to children. That's something that we're hardwired for, language. Now, the other piece of language is what we would call academic language. This is not something we normally get in conversation. It's the type of vocabulary that we get from books. And that's why parents are told all the time, read to your children, read to them as soon as they're born. And it will develop vocabulary, background knowledge, and as I said before, complex sentence structure that they'll start understanding. So when we read to children, it's not just about reading to them. What I want to stress is that we should read with them. This is called interactive read-alouds and interactive conversations. So to bump up this language piece, there should be some serve and return, back and forth. That is what builds capacity for language. We shouldn't just be reading books to children and not stop. We want it to be where we ask them questions, where we point out different words, we extend their language. And if anybody wants to read up on this, they could go to the Harvard University Center on the Developing Child. There's a whole piece on serve and return. What is not proven in the research is just having children listen to a video, plopping them in front of a video or a game, a toy. That will not build language. Even audiobooks are limited. Audiobooks are great for listening to book language, but unless someone is there stopping the audiobook and starting to ask questions and having this back and forth conversation, it's not as powerful as someone reading with a child. So to start, we have Kids Read to Kids, and they are our partners with us. they are going to model interactive read-alouds. And if you could take a look, there are 4 beautiful kids, part of Kids Read to Kids. They are siblings. Some dyslexic, some have ADHD or a combination of both. They started a nonprofit to bring the joy of reading to a struggling reader, because they certainly know what that feels like. So I worked a little bit with this beautiful family, and they are modeling how to read a book interactively. So we're very happy that we were able to partner with them, and kids love to see other kids reading. So, and these kids are just great role models. So is that all there is to learning to read? Is it just about reading aloud to your child? Is it just about filling a home with books? Not exactly. The problem is that the message we get in society is that, you know, if we just read aloud to kids 15 minutes a day, that, you know, we're going to have a reader. And that's not exactly true. This is the message that parents hear all the time. They hear it from pediatricians, they hear it on television, and the message is throughout schools. And many teachers believe this as well, that there must be a problem at home if kids are not picking up reading, that either the home doesn't have enough books, parents aren't doing what they should be doing. So this is quite insulting to many parents, because I know I've spoken to many parents over the years, and most of them say they've read to their children every day from the time they were born, and they still struggled with learning to read. I recently posted some statistics about this from Forbes magazine, which states that 54% of US adults from ages 16 to 74 years old, that's 130 million people, lack proficiency in literacy, reading below the equivalent of a 6th grade level. And it was just, you know, statistics. I posted this, and sure enough, somebody answered me. I took the name away, but it was a teacher who actually said, or failing parents and families not reading and talking to their kids prior to the entryway to school. Hashtag quit blaming schools for everything. So I just want to make it clear that I'm not blaming schools for everything. That's not the point of this. What I am saying, however, is that there's no way that out of 130 million people, that many of whom probably were in homes where there were books or a parent able to read to them, that they struggled because of family influences. That's just not true. So we have to really look and say, all right, there are some parents who are not reading to their kids or not talking enough to their kids, but that cannot be why we have over 60% of the country of students in school not reaching grade level proficiency. So we really have to take a look at what's going on in school. And as teachers, I was a teacher, we have to look at ourselves and say, well, what's going on here? Why aren't certain kids getting it? And why are some kids getting it? What's going on? And when we take a look, it's really how reading is taught from the beginning, what's happening in the classroom. And it's not a teacher's fault, but we can point to what's being taught and how it's being taught. Here's one reason. You know, when I showed you that diagram of word recognition and language comprehension, it's assumed that word recognition means we flash words up and then kids will just learn how to read. And this happens all the time, where even in preschool, there are kids being sent home with sight words, and that's not effective. And this is not how we get children reading. So just please, I wish I could just put up a big stop sign, say stop. This is not the way we get kids to read words. Tonight, we're going to go through how we do get to that word recognition without just expecting kids to memorize words. So most sight words, and I'm calling them sight words because that is a familiar term to most. Some people will use high frequency words, but the expectation is that just some words should just be memorized, and we should just learn it as a picture. You could see the words at the bottom of this slide. That has an outline. We call that a configuration, learning through word configuration, which is really something that has been shown not to work. But yet you still see things like this, where kids are expected to just remember words and they're sent home with a list of words. Meanwhile, at least 85% of words are decodable. They can be figured out phonetically. So there's really no reason to just expect kids to memorize, because all they'll have to go by at that point are visual cues to learn, when really using the sound, because everything is based on speech and language and reading, everything. And, you know, if we don't engage the sound first and then apply letters next, all the kids are doing at this point is trying to look at it like a picture. If we look at the word that, it is a regular word. If we know that the TH represents a sound, and that the A represents another sound, and a T represents another sound, right? The at, that, we can figure it out. There's no reason to have to memorize a word like that. If we look at was, a little trickier, but we could certainly get through the word knowing that the W represents the sound whoop, and that the S at the end could be the S or the Z sound, and that a W before an A sometimes will change the sound of it. So it doesn't happen in the word wax, but in the word was, it happens, or wash, or Washington, or wasp, it happens. So if kids know this, they're able to get through the word left to right, and there's no reason they should have to just sit there and constantly look to memorize word after word. So this is typical of what we would see in schools. It's a guided reading chart of expectations. You will see on the right-hand side, there is a ladder of progress where books go along a gradient scale from A to Z, and that there are expectations at each grade that children could be reading books by grade 1, grade 2, and they should just naturally go up the ladder. And then teachers will label that, you know, a D or a G, whatever their level book is. And that could be either their independent level or an instructional level. That's the level which they would work with those children in groups and do their guided reading instruction. Or there's frustration level, where children are not expected to be taught at their frustration level according to the guided reading chart and the continuum. So I want to start peeling some of the layers away. First, we will never know where the problems are, the underlying issues, if we just stay with leveled books. Those books have pictures attached, different words that are repetitive words, so that kids could just look at a picture, look at the first letter, and guess. And this is typical of what you would see in those lower level books from, A to D in particular. You're going to see a lot of repetitive language. It's not going to tell you whether a kid could actually read through a word or not. So it's not unusual for kids to get up into first and second grade, and some of their difficulties are missed if they're very good at compensating. And, if we just use an assessment like this, it's not going to tell us much. That's also the issue. What is tested is taught. So on the slide, you'll see the benchmark assessment system, and that is a Fontes and Pinnell, we call it BAS, leveled system. And children are given these assessments, usually the beginning of the year, the middle of the year, and the end of the year. And that's how they get a guided reading level based on reading behaviors, not the skills, not the underlying skills that we could then look to see why kids are not reading. So this really has limited use, yet it's in most classrooms across the country. So we're going to go on, and I'm going to show you something now that I think is helpful. If we take a look at the Oregon website, Parent Guide to DIBELS Assessment, this tells you the skills that kids need. This is kind of equivalent to taking someone's temperature and seeing, is this okay? That's a little low. Maybe that's going to be a problem. And it's an indicator for what's to come later on. So some of the assessments here are really important for parents to know. So I just took a clip from this and I'll talk about it. But I do encourage you to go to the Oregon website. There's free information there about DIBELS. Even if a school does not use DIBELS, some schools might use AimsWeb, some might use other types of screeners and progress monitoring tools. But I do like their explanation. And basically all these types of screeners are looking for the same things. So what's important? Initial sound fluency, ISF. Now it's called first sound fluency. This is something to be aware of, that when we have a word such as hat, that a child will be able to recognize and then say the sound. That child could peel off the initial sound. Why is this important? Because when we read, we have to take a word and we have to break it down, whether it's reading and blending sounds or whether we're taking it apart for spelling. And so just being able to take off the initial sound is important. And many kids will struggle with that, just removing the beginning sound. So this is an assessment that's done in kindergarten. And notice it's not something that's done at any other grade point. That's the sensitive time, kindergarten, when we should be looking at this. Now, some schools use these assessments, but then they don't really do anything with these assessments. They're looking at the Fontes and Pinnell type of assessment and looking at leveled books. So we might be monitoring kids, but we're not doing enough here. And I say we're not, and I'm speaking in general terms. Obviously, there are people doing it, but clearly we're missing a lot of kids. Somewhere along the way, there are a lot of children who are getting lost here. So that's a very important screener, and we should be then working on that a bit. Another assessment is phoneme segmentation fluency. And what that means is we take a word like hat, but instead of just removing the initial sound, we are going to break it up into all the sounds, at. And so children should be able to do this. That's also assessed at the kindergarten level. Also, it's assessed in first grade. This is really that window when these early literacy skills should be worked on. So important to make sure that kids have the ability to hear sounds throughout the word, and that if they are weak in that area, that we are working on that. Now, there are other phonological skills that I'll be talking about, but the most important piece is to get down to the phoneme level. That is the smallest unit of sound, the phoneme, phono, sound. And that's where kids struggle, but it's the most important part of phonological awareness. Now, there's also letter naming fluency, but you could see that this is a related early literacy skill. Yet, in most early childhood classrooms, letter naming is stressed. And knowing the alphabet, singing the alphabet, saying all the letter names. And when you think about it, kids really don't need the letter names to read. We need letter names in society, but we really need the sounds to be able to read. And we're going to talk about that as well. So yes, it's a predictor, but children need sounds. There's also nonsense word fluency, and that's now called word reading fluency. It's basically when there's a nonsense word, a pseudo word, and children have to be able to say all the sounds and just read the word. If a child has to say all the sounds and then recode, we call that recoding. So in other words, at, hat, and can't just say hat, it's going to slow them down. So that becomes a very important indicator as well. And that's something that we start looking at in kindergarten too. And certainly really important in first grade, but that can be taken up even higher where we look at nonsense word fluency. And at that point, you know, we usually could recognize if the kid is struggling, but the problem really started at the sound level. And that's something that's not really worked on enough. So what I want to point out is that reading comprehension is not looked at until second grade on a DIBELS assessment. So the way reading comprehension is assessed here is that there are certain words left out and children have some choices and they're supposed to be able to pick a choice that would make sense in context. And the reason it's not even looked at until second grade is because they first have to learn how to read in kindergarten and first grade. So while they're learning how to read and then seeing if they're understanding is way too much on them. Yet, if you look at the Fontes and Pinnell benchmark assessment, that pretty much is all about making meaning from the beginning. So what are kids forced to do? They have to try to use the cues to figure out words, to get meaning from what they see. And that is detrimental in the long run, because I work with so many kids who get the message that reading is about meaning, making meaning. So what's the message for them? Making meaning. Well, if they can't read a word, they're going to try to make it into a word that they already know. And you see that. They're going to take words that are in their vocabulary, because the message to them must be, I must be reading this incorrectly, so I'm going to pull out a word that looks like a word I already know. So this sets up a problem right away. We're giving kids two different ways to look at words. One way, where we're assessing the skills, we're expecting them to have an understanding about sounds and words, being able to connect letters to those sounds, and then they should be able to read the word. The other way, on the Fontes and Pinnell benchmark assessment, it's really about the words coming after. It's like, let's get the meaning from every which way, and then we'll see if our guess works. Because you will see words on this that kids can't possibly read. They might know certain words that they've memorized, but then there are words they can't possibly know, so they just take the first letter and they guess. So let's talk a little bit about phonological awareness. So that's an umbrella term for being able to identify and manipulate sounds in language. We could be talking about same sounds and different sounds. Do you hear the same sound at the beginning of pen and pipe, right? We could include rhyming in there. We could include, onset and rhyme, where we are breaking apart words based on what comes before the vowel in the word, and then the vowel and what comes after. So there's a lot of ways we could look at sounds in our language, but as I said before, the most important part is at the phoneme level, the smallest units of sound. And phonemic awareness is directly linked to successfully learning how to read. So it's so important to catch this early. When we are working at the phoneme level, we are either blending, which means we're pushing sounds together to hear a word. We're taking a word, breaking it apart, that's segmenting, or we are manipulating sounds. And this is a skill that's needed for children to be able to recognize words automatically, fluently. So sometimes kids are okay pushing words together, pulling the words apart into their individual sounds, but it's really hard for them to move sounds in and out of words. And so that's a more advanced level of phonemic awareness. I want to stress that the term phonemic awareness and all phonological awareness work is about hearing sounds. It's not having letters in front of you. However, letters will strengthen phonemic awareness when we bring them in. So we want to quickly bring letters in. We don't want to just stay with activities for the sake of just playing around with sounds. We want kids to be able to quickly peel off the initial sound, to be able to break a word up into sounds, to be able to push sounds together, and to be able to manipulate sounds. And then if we bring those letters in, once they have an understanding of what they are listening for, and then pulling the letter in that represents those sounds, or letters that represent those sounds, then it just strengthens the connection, and you'll see that soon. So here are some examples of things that we could do with kids. We could ask them, like I said, what is the first sound you hear in the word hat? That's looking for the initial sound. They have to recognize it, and then they have to say it. Phoneme segmentation. What sounds do you hear in the word hot? Hot. Right, to break that word up. And then when words get a little bit more complicated, when there are more sounds, they have to be able to break the word up into 4 sounds or 5 sounds. And then we have blending. What word would you have if you pushed these sounds together? S, at. And they should be able to recognize, oh, it's sat. And some kids will have a hard time hearing the word. I'm using simple words now, but there are harder words where when they hear the sounds, they come up with something different. They miss a sound, they change a sound. And some of those kids have a hard time holding on to sounds. They can't remember from the beginning until the end. And we'll talk about a way that can help with that too. Manipulation, here's an example of manipulation of phonemes. We could do a deletion exercise. What word would be left if the k sound were taken away from cat? So we know it would be at. We're pulling off a sound. If there's substitution going on, what word would you have if you changed the h in hot to p? And so we would get pot. So I'm keeping it really simple now just to give you an idea what it means when we manipulate sounds in and out of words. This is always a harder level than just being able to segment. And so when kids get older, we would want to use some type of assessment to see if a child struggled. We would want to see how they do this type of activity. There's a book, and one of our partners in this is Pamela Brooks, and she has a book called Before the Squiggle Code, Book 1. And if you can't think of some of these types of exercises, this is a real parent-friendly and affordable book that you might want to take a look at. For teachers, there are different types of activities they could use where it's set with a curriculum. There's also the David Kilpatrick book. But for a parent, this is pretty simple to just pick up. The words are there, and there are a lot of exercises that you could do with young children. All right, so once we have phonemic awareness, as I said before, we want to quickly bring letters in. Letter recognition, letter knowledge is another very, very important indicator. And when these two come together, phonemic awareness and letter knowledge, they are the two best predictors of how well children will learn to read during their first 2 years in school. So this phoneme-grapheme connection, and all that means is sound and letter. That's what it is, but it doesn't necessarily mean one letter. It could be more than one letter, and I'll show you that soon, that represents a sound. And then the opposite is true too, where we could have certain letters that have more than one sound. So this is the kind of work that we want to build early on so that we don't lose kids. This is how they should be taught, and working at this level and practicing at this level in kindergarten and by grade 1 at the most is so important. We don't spend enough time here. We need a lot more work at this level. One way to get that practice in with letter recognition is to use an embedded alphabet. So this is taken from Itchy's alphabet. Brenda Larson is the person who designed it. And I met Brenda, Marion and I met Brenda at a conference in New York City. And I feel like she's my soul sister. When I listen to her speak, we spoke the same language. And she has some wonderful materials. This is her embedded alphabet. As you could see, it's a picture of a snake. And then we could easily be able to see the shape of an S, but we're not going to use the letter name. We're going to stick to the sound. S is a snake. S. Notice, we're not complicating this with letter name, sound, and word. It's too much for some kids. So why is that? Some children will hear letter names again and again, and then they might hear the letter Y. They know the name Y, but they're thinking the sound is W. Same thing with a U. They know the letter U, but they're thinking the sound of a U is Y. So we have to be really careful because the kids who struggle start mixing up letters and sounds. And it becomes very, very confusing for them. So one recommendation is to peel away the letter name, stick with the sound. Second recommendation would be to stick with lowercase letters first, because that's what they see more often. So this is very different from what you would see in early childhood classrooms, where it's mostly capital letters, and it's mostly letter names. So here are some more, pictures that give us the letter recognition. You could clearly see that the bat and the ball looks like the letter B, and the dog with a tail, right, looks like a D. And if children start to trace this and then, remove the picture and we work on just the letter, they have this picture to help them remember the letter, but not by a letter name and not by just flashing something in front of them. It's a way for them to get to the sound. So it's very helpful to use at the beginning stage of learning to read. This is also from Itchy's alphabet. And I just love what, this can do for a young child. Then this is so important. Once we start recognizing letters, we have to look at letter formation. Notice that the letter D starts not at the top. It starts right where the curve begins, like a C, right? And then it goes around, it goes up tall, and then it falls down. And then for a B, it does start at the top. We go down, we come up, and we come around to bump the line. So if children are making these letters differently and they learn the sound quickly, attaching sound to forming the letter properly, that is much more effective in having them separate B's and D's, because these letters are confused all the time, along with the letter P. Actually, all three of them could be very confusing. So it's really important to say the sound, write the letter properly, and also to think, what is your mouth doing at this time? What's going on? So with a B, we're really starting with mouth sealed. You could feel some vibration with a B, right? With the D, you see my mouth is not sealed. There's a different feeling going on in the mouth, but you will also feel it here, D, D, right? With a P, it's gentle, puff of air. So these are the types of things you want to bring to a child's attention. What's going on in the mouth? What's going on with the tongue, the lips? You know, how sounds are formed. It's very important. So surprise, surprise, if you are watching this and you like Itchy's alphabet, Brenda is kindly offering anyone who works with us, Teach My Kid to Read, she's offering a 10% discount. So you would go to itchysalphabet.com and put in the promo code capital TMKTR 2020, and you can get 10% off. Thank you. So one thing that's great about Itchy's alphabet or anything we're talking about, it provides a lot of repetition. Repetition is not a dirty word. Practice is not a dirty word. So we want repetition of underlying skills. And being able to write a letter and then say the sounds, that is a multisensory activity. And it's a very important multisensory activity. So it gives us those practice opportunities. Somehow in reading, we came to think that practice is not very important. And it just blows my mind that in any other discipline, I don't care what it is, whether it's sports, music, art, karate, whatever it is, there's a lot of practice that's involved in getting better at something. But yet, we expect kids to be able to just remember words by flashing them in front of them or remembering letters when really, you know, every letter could be a stick, a circle. It's hard. They need a lot of practice and active practice where they're doing something, moving letters or writing letters properly and saying the sounds. So we don't want to miss practice opportunities. That is one of the biggest problems in the early grades. We're rushing them through. And this, of course, is probably due to all the pressure we have in school at the moment, whether it's Common Core or other reasons. But it used to be we spent a lot of time on handwriting. I remember spending a lot of time teaching kids how to write. And now we rush them and we expect them to just kind of pick it up, even if there are explicit handwriting programs with phonics programs. Apparently, kids start to do it their own way. They're drawing their letters instead of really learning to write it properly. And we should catch this early before it becomes habit forming. It's always harder to break later on. So here's a common picture. I'm sure some of you have seen it with the chair that could be turned, you know, upside down, a different position. It's still going to be a chair. A chair is a chair is a chair. But a B, D, P, and Q will not be the same if you turn it around. So that's why we want to be able to give kids lots of opportunities to practice. Here's the sound, write the letter, and say the sound. And it's this quick recognition and lots of exposure to the alphabet and finding multiple practice opportunities to build memory of a letter. Another piece is adding this verbal cueing, helping kids to know direction. So some kids don't understand when you're saying go, you know, this way, that way. For them, they need to pull down toward them or pull away from them to make the letter. So we have to give them some of that help, some of that verbal cueing. Pencil grip is so important. I mean, so many kids who struggle, you could see the pencil grip is just, you know, tight, not using a tripod grip. And this also should be developed early on. And what happens, I think, is that we give up too early. You know, I speak to parents all the time, and I'll ask, you know, does your child get OT? Oh, yes, he was in OT for a long time. And then right away, they're put on the computer, they're put on a keyboard, rather than really work this through, standing kids up at an easel, having them practice, and then going to a table and maybe using a slant board to practice. We're just giving up too early on handwriting. There are too many kids who don't know how to hold a pencil, don't know how to form their letters. And remember, the name of the game with all this is automatic recognition, automatic letter formation. So important. So you could see pencil grip, that tripod grasp, should be developing between age 4.5 to age 7. And again, those are those early childhood years. We're not giving kids opportunities to develop that pincer grip by working with their hands, doing enough hands-on play, and putting things together, beading, doing all those things that we used to do more of in early childhood. And we're seeing that kids are struggling more and more. Same thing with gross motor, not moving enough. We're not engaging their bodies enough. When kids write, they need to hold their bodies up. But you will see kids slouching. You'll see how they're trying to lean over and write. They need some core strength. They need to move. They need to be able to hold their own bodies up. So this, again, should be worked on early on because it will impact everything else later on. So the place we should be looking at is Tier 1 general education. What goes on in the mainstream classroom? That should be the focus. Because RTI, right, response to intervention, is useless if we don't have proper Tier 1 instruction with the necessary practice of underlying skills. What's happening, and I said it before, we're giving them 2 different ways to look at words, 2 different ways to approach a word. One is say the sound, say the word. The other is, well, here are words that you've seen before. I like, and now use your other strategies to be able to read. And this could be in the same classroom. There are kids getting phonics instruction, and then in the same classroom, they're being given these types of strategies, like skip the word or take a guess. So RTI depends on evidence-based instruction from the start for all children. That is not happening. So we give them these evidence-based interventions, but they have limited use, because if kids are receiving a daily dose of balanced literacy day in, day out, and then they're being pulled out and they're being taught a different way, they come back and they're being told to skip words or, you know, does that make sense? You should be making meaning, all that kind of stuff. Instead of encouraging left to right all through the word reading, they don't know what to think, right? It's the same thing giving them sight words too early, where they're expected to just read the whole word, just look at it, but then they're being told, no, you should sound out that word. That's a word you can sound out. No, that's not a word you need to sound out, just memorize it. So they're getting these mixed messages everywhere. Okay, so if children have poor phonemic awareness and poor letter knowledge when they start first grade and they're in that 20th percentile, they're going to struggle with phonics. They're going to struggle with word reading. So remember, phonics is learning how to associate those letters and sounds and sounding out a word and breaking words apart. And word reading is just that quick recognition. If phonics is done right with, phonemic awareness and kids could hear the sounds and quick letter recognition, those words that they sound out will become sight words. Learning to just recognize a word by sight because they've had these multiple opportunities to understand how to get inside a word, not by reading around a word. Very different. And if those kids do not get targeted intervention, they're going to struggle with reading comprehension. That's a secondary consequence of all these underlying skills. So yeah, they are, in the big picture, they're lower level skills, but they're so important, the most important when kids are reading. And we're either overlooking it or we're not doing enough with it. We're not giving them enough practice. We're not catching them soon enough. And then these kids will struggle throughout school. So that leads us to a little bit about what is dyslexia. So this is Dyslexia Awareness Month. And, there are a number of different ways to look at dyslexia. Some people have a very involved definition of dyslexia. Some people have a very narrow definition. Some people don't believe in dyslexia. They don't think it's real. So I'm going to tell you that from my research into this and listening to experts in the field, I do believe that there are children born with a genetic predisposition to some language difficulties, and dyslexia is a language-based difficulty. I'm going to take Dr. Jack Fletcher's definition. He works out of the Texas Center for Learning Disabilities. And he says that dyslexia occurs primarily at the level of the single word and involves the ability to decode and spell printed words in isolation, accurately and automatically. So now that is a pretty narrow way to look at dyslexia. There are going to be other factors where you'll see there are signs, there are indicators, but if we really just want to, peel away everything else and just look at what dyslexia truly is about, it's about accurate and fluent word reading, and then also having trouble in the other direction, spelling the printed word in isolation. And there are kids who really struggle with this. They will have problems probably also hearing single sounds in words, those phonemes, those individual sounds. So at the phoneme level, these kids will struggle. Dyslexia is identified best through assessments of reading and spelling skills. So when we look at going for a neuropsych to get the big picture of kids, it's not that there's anything wrong with that. It will give us a lot of information. But in order to be able to work with kids, we just really need to know and be able to look at what exactly is holding these kids back from being able to read, and then giving them instruction and seeing their response to instruction. An IQ test is not necessary. The discrepancy model lacks validity. And this has been said again and again. So there's no harm in doing these types of assessments, especially parents want to be able to get help in school. And if they want to get specialized reading instruction, They need a diagnosis like this outside the school system many times. That's unfair. It shouldn't be like that. There are many kids with word reading struggles, and their parents will not know to get them a diagnosis outside, or they can't afford to do this. This should not be the way that kids get proper instruction. It should be where all kids are getting tier 1 systematic explicit instruction. And from those children, there will be some kids who struggle, who need some more help. And if reading is taught this way, we could expect most kids to learn how to read. And then there will be some children, very few, not the kinds of numbers we have now, who still struggle and struggle and struggle. But for the most part, we should be able to get 95% of kids up and reading. So there are some myths about dyslexia and other reading difficulties. Some people want to know, are reading difficulties a result of vision difficulties? Well, a child could have vision difficulties, but that doesn't mean it's dyslexia. So could they both be present, vision difficulties and dyslexia? Yes, but going for vision therapy is not going to help a child learn to read. There is no evidence on this. There are children who are helped with vision therapy, but they have to learn how to read. Vision therapy is not going to do that. Some kids will say that their eyes hurt, things are blurry. And I could tell you that that possibly, could happen. But you also have to realize that when kids are taught to jump around a page looking for cues, and they're not reading left to right all through the word, guess what? They're going to get headaches. They're going to lose their place. It's going to appear as if they have some vision problems. But most reading difficulties at the word level are about the sounds, that there is this phonological deficit or difficulty. So will my child grow out of a reading problem? Will he be developmentally ready? Now, this is something that parents hear all the time. Wait and see. Give it a chance. Schools are guilty of this too, not catching kids and not recognizing that, no, they will not grow out of a reading problem. No, we don't have to wait for kids to be developmentally ready. Are some kids immature? Yes. Are some kids antsy? They can't sit still? That's true. But as far as being ready, once you know that they could peel off the first sound in a word, and they could start breaking a word up into its sounds, then we could start applying letters, right? Once they could hear the initial sound, we could start writing the letter, learning the letter. Once they could segment a word into all its sounds, then we could start taking those letters and plugging it in, and they could start being able to read and moving ahead, left to right all through a word. So it's really about building the skills to be able to read, not a certain magic time when they are going to be ready. Is my child just not trying hard enough? This is the most heartbreaking thing. When parents tell me that they blamed their children, thinking that their kids were lazy and they just, didn't want to try. Meanwhile, kids who struggle probably try harder than most. And it's not a question of being lazy, especially when we're talking about little kids. They want to learn how to read. They see adults reading, they want to read. They get a sense of pride when they learn how to read. So it's not about not trying hard enough. Do boys have more reading problems than girls? No. We will see reading problems in both boys and girls. So here are some red flags. So if you're wondering, could this be my child, right? Always, always, always think about speech and language first. So if there were any speech delays or articulation difficulties, you know right there that your child might struggle to read. There's a good chance of it. Most of my students have had speech and language difficulties. Sometimes no, or it wasn't picked up, right? But usually you will see that these children were late to talk, or they had some articulation problems, a combination of both. They have some receptive language issues, understanding what they hear, or expressing what they want to say. They might have trouble rhyming. So rhyming is not one of those indicators that are really strongly connected to reading, but it's something to look at, right? When kids struggle to rhyme, recognizing rhyme, generating rhyme, it's something to think about. It's under that umbrella of phonological awareness. Trouble learning letter names and sounds. Yeah, if they need a lot of repetitions in this, red flag, right? Mispronouncing words. So, the kids, it's not just one word like spaghetti, pescetti, but when there are quite a few of these words, when there are a number of sounds in a word that get twisted along the way, when it's hard for a child to get a word out that has a lot of syllables in it, it's going to be hard for them to read a multisyllable word too when they get to that point, or a word that has many sounds in it, even if it's one syllable. So poor grammar and syntax. If you see a child who will say a sentence and it kind of comes out in a very different way where words are twisted, that's a red flag. Difficulties with sequencing. This is huge. Following directions, holding on to a sequence. I see this all the time where kids have a hard time sequencing sounds, holding on to sounds, holding on to directions, being able to repeat something back in the right sequence. So that's a red flag. Many times we'll find out that parents also struggled in this area. So we do have to look at heredity in this and delays. Children might also have ADHD, sensory issues, behavioral difficulties, but that does not mean, and I want to make this clear, that does not mean that, that's part of dyslexia. Many times you'll see comorbidity, certain things going together. It's not unusual, but when we pare down, dyslexia is really about accurate and fluent word reading at the word level, and that's where most reading problems come from. So moving on, the good news is, even if kids have this genetic predisposition to language difficulties, dyslexia, guess what? Reading difficulties are preventable. That's huge. That's huge. Just because a child struggles in these areas doesn't mean that they won't learn how to read. We could catch this early on if we're giving them the right instruction and the right intervention. If we pay attention to spoken language, we intervene early, working on that phonological piece. If we are able to demonstrate how sounds are pushed together, how to break a word apart into individual sound units, right? So we're trying to build letter recognition and strong letter sound correspondences. That's so important early on. I keep repeating that again and again, because as kids get older, if there are holes, we can't skip this. We are still coming back and trying to fill in holes while they're learning much more difficult material. So cracking the code, what makes English so difficult? There are 44 sounds, approximately, right? These individual phonemes, but there are only 26 letters in the alphabet, which means that we have to bring letters together and have them work together to represent a sound. So if two letters are coming together, forming a new sound like sh, right? We call that a digraph. Those are consonant digraphs, an SH, a TH, a CH. It's not maintaining its own sounds. It's a brand new sound. We also have, same thing with vowels, where we move letters together to represent the different vowel sounds. And there is not a one-to-one match between letters and sounds. And if children are not aware of that, they're going to stick with one way, thinking that that's the only way that this letter will sound, right? When they try to sound something out. So we have to teach them these options, and we have to do it in a systematic way so that kids could start practicing. It should be cumulative. With Spanish, a language like Spanish, you know, there's more regularity in letter sound correspondences. So it's much easier to make those connections. In English, we really have to spell everything out and give them many more opportunities to learn and practice. So here's a picture of two letters that are making one sound. And you might say, well, where are the letters? This is just an example of something we could show kids, because letters are pictures. These are pictures. Letters are pictures of sounds. I learned this when I went for my phonographics training, which is a systematic way of learning how to read. It's one of those explicit systematic programs. I'm not endorsing a program right now, but I'm just saying that I learned so much. And one of the things I remember, and it stuck with me, was when they explained a digraph, they said, what's this shape? It's a triangle. What's this shape? It's a square. When you put it together, what would you call that? You're not going to say triangle square the same way you're not going to say s. Comes together, it's sh. This is a house, right? It's a brand new way of saying it. So I love that that's a way to explain to kids how letters could come together for one sound. Then we have the other piece where one sound could have multiple spelling options. If we take the sound O, it could be O like in no, just the O representing the O sound. It could be the O with the E at the end, where it's split, working as a team. It could be the OW showing O. It could be the OA showing O. It could be the OE showing O. It could be 4 letters showing O, like in though. Children will eventually learn all the options. Do we throw all the options at them at once? No, this is for you, Joyce, out there, Joyce Shaw, who always talks about this. No, we don't throw it all at them at once. It's supposed to be that we slowly show them the options, the ones that are most common, and then working our way to the least common options. So here's an example of OW that can be one letter pattern showing multiple sounds. It could be O like in snow. It could be owl like in plow. It could be O like in slow. It could be owl like in down. Now, plow in British English would not be spelled like this. But this is for an American audience right now, OW can flex to be those two sounds. Just an example of how there is this flexing going on. So what I say to kids, I'll say, think Toto. Try one, try the other. And if one is more common than the other, we always go with the most common sound first and then try the others. So something that I feel needs to be taught a little bit more explicitly is how to blend sounds. Kids are getting stuck in this tapping, sh, ip, right? Where they're tapping sounds, but then they get stuck. They can't bring the word together, and they constantly are tapping while they're reading. And then, of course, people will say, well, that's not reading. Yeah, they never got to a point where the sounds are blended together. Shouldn't be like that. There should be left to right blending. Blend as you go. Show kids that we take the first two sounds we blend. We hear what that is. Add in the next and move in that left to right fashion. So we need a lot more practice in blending. This is a big piece where kids might be able to say the sounds, but then they miss sounds along the way. They come out with a different word. A way to help this is you could show kids to drive a car right through the word, showing them at, and actually take a matchbox car and just drive it through a word, right? Showing from start to finish how we smoothly go through a word. Pretend to just take it right through the word. When we want to break a word up, some people use a robot. They use a picture of a robot, call it robot talk because that's what it could sound like. So a word like cup, up, right? So that's robot talk. We're taking the word, it goes into the robot, and it comes out in all the sounds. And then we could take tokens and move these sounds into sound boxes. So the tokens will represent each sound in a word, something tangible for a child. And then we could remove those tokens, and kids could then write the letters while saying the sounds on a second go. So again, it's not just working on sounds and leaving it at the sound level. We want to quickly tie letters into this, and that will strengthen their phonemic awareness as well. So here's an example we could use for spelling. So if the word is fish, we first hear all the sounds, the phonemes, ish, right? And then the kids could then connect it to letters, the graphemes. And then they would write while they say those sounds, ish, while they write the letters. Notice that there are 3 boxes, but 4 letters in fish. For a sheep, right, there would be 3 boxes, but 5 letters because the sh is going into one box, the E is going into the second box, 2 E's, and then the P is going into the last box, right? So this is a way we could work with spelling, making sure that children are connecting letters to sounds. Sometimes teachers use dry erase boards, and instead of boxes, they just make little dashes. I do that. And this way they're hearing the sounds, they make their dashes, and then they get the sounds of the word, and then they're ready to write the word while saying the sounds. We could also play around with some of this and do manipulation exercises. That's something else that I learned from my phonographics training, and other teachers use it as well, where we will give them, let's say, the word fish. They have to say it back, fish. And then we could move a new sound in. So instead of sh, say t. So now what's the new word? It would be fit, right? Fit. If this is fit, if we change the I to a, what's the new word? Fat. So, and we would play with sounds, these manipulations, these chains, and that also helps children tremendously. So just to be clear that we know the difference here, or what I was talking about before, when two letters come together, we would call that a digraph. A blend, each sound is maintained. So in the word slip, we have separate sounds. In ship, right, the S and the H come together for one. So that's why you see in one word, 3 different sounds, the other 4 sounds. So this is a page taken from the Hornet, and we are also working with the Word WASP authors, and they have been very generous in allowing us to post a couple of their pages, and they are partners with us too. So hello, Marie and Nicola. Thank you so much for working with us. Here's a page from the Hornet Literacy Primer. So if we take a look at this, the child hears the word fad, but they're not going to write the whole word. They're just going to write a. So they have to pick out the vowel sound, isolate the vowel from the word. That's a really good activity because so many children have trouble hearing the vowel sound. So they're hearing it in the word, but only picking out a vowel sound. Here's something else that's really very nice about the Hornet. Parents or any adult will say a couple of sounds put together, and then the child has to write it. These are not real words, but they have to really be listening to the sounds. So I want to just point out, if a parent or an adult, any adult says L, and a child just writes the letter L, you know that they're confusing letter names with sounds. If the adult, the coach, says F, and they just write the letter F, same thing. They should be hearing the vowel sound L, F, right? So that this way they are really focused on the sounds and writing the letters. Spelling strengthens reading. So encoding, that's what spelling is, will strengthen their decoding ability. And that's the angle that Hornet takes, where we work on writing and spelling, and there are, of course, words to read as well, but a big part of this is spelling. So we have another surprise, 10% off on the Hornet, and if you email sales@wordwasp.com and put in the coupon code capital TMKTR, you will be able to get a 10% discount. And an American version is coming soon. They're working on that. And we're so thrilled to have them as partners. Again, we're not endorsing any programs here, but we know that parents want resources. And what we tried to do was we tried to find resources that were easy enough for parents to do and not expensive, and something that if they wanted to try, they could get started. What we're looking to do at Teach My Kid to Read is not only share resources, but a big part of what we do will be support and training. And that's going to be my piece in this. So big things coming up. We are going to be working with libraries, and that's going to be the important piece, the support and training. So we'll talk about that in the future. So phonics decoding, you know, the takeaway from this is if we have strong phonemic awareness and solid letter sound skills, we will be able to get to the sight word level. That's the way we acquire sight words. They become sight words to recognize words automatically, not by just flashing whole words. A way to also get some repetition is to use computer programs. And we are so lucky that we also have Nessie. And Nessie is a wonderful program to supplement what kids get. Now, this is not to supplant in-person instruction. It's just another way to get kids to practice and to use their phonics skills. So thank you, Nessie, for giving us a generous donation. We appreciate it. And, we hope you also check out the new movie, Michael. It's fascinating, highly recommended. It's something everybody should see. Every teacher, every parent should see it. Michael. Our main goal in Teach My Kid to Read is for everyone to have equity in resources. That's why we are trying to spread the word through libraries. And a very important piece I keep mentioning is practice and learning how to read left to right all through the word. There aren't many decodable books in schools. Only some are just starting to get them. So we are hoping that libraries will join us and start purchasing decodable books so that they could have a section in the library. This picture was taken from a local library of mine, Bethpage Library, and they also partnered with us. They're one of the libraries that we were so thrilled. They were our first, actually, last year that partnered with us. And we are looking for partnerships everywhere. And we want libraries to be able to offer this type of help with resources and support for parents early on so that nobody has to go through the heartache of not being able to afford getting proper help and knowing where to turn. It's not too late for any publisher out there to join us. We welcome you, and we hope that you will realize that libraries need these resources. What we'll be using in Teach My Kid to Read is a program that we kind of call IC Sam, the little books, but it's supposed to be basic reading instruction, BRI. And I first heard about BRI on a Yahoo group years ago. And I want to thank Dick Schutz. Dick has been a friend of mine from years ago, and he's a brilliant man. He was a researcher at the Squirrel Laboratory that conducted research and development, R&D. And what they found is that these little magical books, the IC-SAM books, were a very effective teaching tool for beginners. So they use these books in kindergarten, no level books, just these books. And with these books, most kids were able to read. So this is without looking at any of the other pieces I talked about, right? Kids started to learn how to read with a synthetic phonics approach, just using these IC-SAM books. So those are the books that we're going to be using in our library program, and I'm going to be able to help parents get started. They are offered free as part of Teach My Kid to Read. Dick was kind enough to help us get started, and Marion had a tremendous part in being able to bring all these books to an electronic version for everyone to be able to use. So we're so thrilled to have these books. And they are not just decodable books, they are research-based. This, between 1966 and 1976, which shows how long we've known that there's a way to teach kids and we just don't. That's what's shocking to me, that these books were tested and used in many trials. So you could look that up. But these simple little books, starting at a very basic level and working up to about a third grade level, are really just so important, and they will be available to anyone who joins our library program. And we will support you in that, as is all of these types of materials, the Itchy's Alphabet, the Hornet, anything, the decodable books. And we want to thank all our partners in the decodable books. We have Whole Phonics, that's a partner with us, Flyleaf Publishing, we have Dog on a Log. We have so many partners, so many great decodable books that decided to partner with us. But these books are free, and they're available, and they work. There's no question about it. So this is going to be the core part of our program. As you can see, this little road map kind of is a takeoff on the rope that I showed you at the beginning, where we have two roads, just like the rope started to weave together. Well, here we have the two roads that are coming together, and decodable books kind of tie the pieces together and give kids the necessary practice. So decodable books have their place, and that's why it's on the map. And so one thing we say, we put decodable books on the map. They are an important piece, especially for early readers. So we want to stress that should be available to all kids. They shouldn't really be in books where they're guessing when they're learning to read. My books that I wrote are If Only I Would Have Known, and that book is geared to parents just starting out, wanting to learn the best ways to help their children and proper reading instruction. And then my other book, Failing Students or Failing Schools, A Parent's Guide to Reading Instruction and Intervention, is geared to parents of children already in the school system. It also talks about prevention as well as intervention. This book is really about my experience as well. So it's part memoir, but it has all the things you should be looking for, the reading process, and being able to recognize the right program. If Only I Would Have Known came after that, because so many parents were so saddened once they saw, oh, there is a better way. I thought it was me. I thought it was my kid. And I would hear this expression, if only I would have known, and I would have people cry all the time. So this is heartbreaking. So that book is just with characters, and it's written in a very simple, easy to understand way. And both books really will give parents a very good foundation. They're both in print versions as well as ebook versions. So I'm so thrilled. The If Only I Would Have Known, I wasn't sure if we were going to do an ebook version, but my illustrator, Cheryl Rosenstock Marcus, was able to get it going. So I'm so thrilled with that. I want to also just quickly thank the Dyslexia Initiative team for publishing my article, Time to Burn the Boat. If you haven't read it, please read it. It will give you some perspective on some of the things I'm talking about. And you should get their newsletter. It is fantastic. Sign up, go to the Dyslexia Initiative site, subscribe to the newsletter. It really is a professional piece. I'm just so amazed by how well they put this together. Just to summarize, these are the essential components: phonemic awareness, accurate decoding, and oral language. Stay tuned, because we are working with a partner to provide a unique screener that will put families and schools on the right track to reading success. So excited about that. We have our events calendar. Please make sure you catch everything. We're so sorry that our first event did not go as planned. We had some technical difficulties, but we are very happy to bring these presentations to you. So please try not to miss it. I'll be back at the end of the month, both as a presenter, and also I will be interviewing some wonderful guests. So excited about that. And this is our roadmap to reading. As I mentioned, we are planning to put all the pieces together for parents and support you. That will be coming in 2021. And last but not least, special thanks to Marion Waldman, founder, executive director. I found not only a partner, but a friend, and she's a very special person. She put her heart and soul into this, and I want her to just feel really good about everything. So I want to just thank her. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned.